If you've worked with Excel spreadsheets before, then you might be wondering if there's a way to have similar functionality like having certain formulas and calculations inside of tables in Notion as well. And there actually is, and that's what we're going to cover in this video. It's a feature called Notion Formulas. Now, that being said, this is a feature that isn't too common for many use cases. So a lot of people will be completely fine not using Notion Formulas, but still for many people, it might be a very important feature. And that's why we're going to cover it in this video. It's going to be a bit more technical than some of the previous videos because it does require some logic and has some concepts that are similar to like programming languages. But I try my best to make it as understandable as possible, and we'll go through everything with lots and lots of practical examples. The first thing that you have to understand when working with Notion formulas is the terminology. And the most basic concept is just a normal property. These are basically the same properties that we had previously in our databases. So for example, here I have a number, I've got another number, and these are basically properties in our Notion formulas as well. So you'll actually see that in this third column, I am using the Notion formula property. So if I click on edit property, you see that this is a formula property type. And if we click to edit the property, we'll actually see that we are just printing out or adding in back the number 1. So this number in the first column, and we're just adding that to this column as well. And we do this using the properties option here that we have in formulas to just get the value of any of these other columns to use inside of our formulas. So these properties are basically the basis that you can perform certain operations on, which we'll get to next. We can use lots and lots of different operators. So for example, here I've set up an example that has that just multiplies the first number and the second number. So this number and this number. And we can do that again if we click in here and check this out. Go to edit the formula. We'll see that we just get this prop 1. So this is how we kind of get the value from one of these properties. Add the prop and then the name of the property. And then we have the multiply symbol basically. And then we take the second argument, which is the number 2. And we could also, if we wanted to, just add the number 1 again. So I could say prop and then number 1 again, like this. And now we would actually multiply number 1 times number 2 times number 1. And now the result is 4 times 5 times 4, basically. So basically this calculation. Another example would be the larger than or smaller than operator. So in this formula here, what we're actually doing is we are checking which of the values is bigger. So we've got the same values again. We've got the number 1 and the number 2. But in this case, we're saying property 1 is bigger than property 2, question mark, basically. So this is a logical operation. Again, if you're familiar with programming languages, then this might feel very common knowledge to you. But basically, we're kind of asking the computer the question, is number 1 bigger than number 2? And if it is, then this checkbox here will actually be checked. And if it isn't, it won't be checked. So you see it over here. In the first case, 4 is obviously smaller than 5. So this is not true. And that's why this isn't checked. And in the second case, 34 is obviously bigger than 2. And so this checkbox is checked. As a last example for these operators, I want to show you the if statements. And this again is basically a programming concept, a programming language concept that you can use here as well. So the idea of it is that you have some sort of value that can either be true or false. And then based on that, you can either do something like one thing if it's true, another thing if it's false. So here we're using the fact that we have this check over here, which says, is number 1 larger than number 2? So this is what we just talked about. And we use that as our logical value, like as our basis for this operation. And then we have this question mark. So we're saying, is this true or false? And then we'll do this if it's true and this if it's false. And so you see, we're basically just using this little text. So we're adding this little text as a property here or as a value. And depending on if it's true or false, it will be either number 1 is larger or number 2 is larger. And you see in the case where number 1 is smaller than number 2, so where number 2 is larger in the first column, this then shows us number 2 is larger. And in the other case, it shows us number 1 is larger. So this allows us to make some logical decisions in these database tables based on certain values that we have. The next term you'll often hear in combination with Notion formulas is functions. And functions are basically pre-built operations that you can use to get things done more quickly. So let me show you an example. Here for the title length, we are using a function. And this basically gives us back the length of the title, like the character length of this title here at the beginning. So if I expand it, you see that this one is the longest. And how do we do that? Well, basically it's pretty easy. There is a function called length. So if I type in just length, you see that it is in here and it also tells us what it does. And we can just put a piece of text into these brackets like this, and it will give us back how many characters this text has. So in our case, what we're doing is we're just giving it the property title, which is, if we go back out, this is just this property. And so we're telling this formula, give us back the length in characters of these different titles. Another thing we can do is we can actually get the current date with the now function. So we just use this function. So typically for functions, you just write the name of the functions and then these open and close brackets. So just type that in and you'll get back the current date that you currently have. Now, we can use that for various different use cases. So for example, let's say we have a project management board and we have certain due dates for specific tasks, for example, or let's say our project is due in a couple of weeks, basically. So I've tried to simulate that here with this column that says due dates, and I just added some random dates in here. And what we can now do with these functions, which is really nice, is we can calculate how many days we still have left until we reach that due date. So for this first row, let's imagine this is like a project. As it's the 3rd of April currently, we only have 2 days left until this due date is reached. For this one, we have 38 days left because the due date is in May. And for this one, we have 10 days left. So this is really useful for calculating things, and especially if you do project management in Notion to see which projects are close to the deadline. So maybe these projects are the ones that you need to focus on and put your work in to actually get them done. The last function I want to show you is this one, and it basically allows us to replace characters in our text fields here with other characters. So I've taken this really stupid example of replacing the O with an A in the title. So again, you see this is a short title, this title is longer, and these have lots and lots of O's. But if we use a replace formula, we can actually replace the O with an A in this property and get the value back, and then we get this nonsense here. So something you might not need for as many use cases, but for some people this is really helpful because replacing text is really, really common in many professions. And so we come to the last term that you might come across with Notion formulas, and these are constants. Now constants are basically just physical constants. For example, things like pi, you can see them here, or like e, the number e, true and false. So these are the constants, and these are things that you will probably use on a very sporadic basis because I've never come across anybody that actually uses them. It's probably most suited for mathematicians, but I don't know if you want to do all your mathematic calculations inside of Notion. So I'm yet to come across somebody that actually uses them, but yeah, it's still good to know that they're there. And with that, we've covered a whole lot of ground on Notion formulas. Now we'll go into more detail in the next videos where we'll build a full CRM tool using all the things we learned in the last videos, and where you can actually deepen your understanding of these concepts, because I understand that it can be quite difficult to wrap your head around all these concepts. So stay tuned and I'll see you there.